Picture this. It's 1892. Pitch dark. The sun hasn't come up yet. And 6,000 soldiers are standing completely still, weapons in their hands, waiting. Now here is the part they left out of every history book you've ever read. 6,000 of those soldiers were women. Not symbolic, not ceremonial, not standing in the back. Trained, professional, the most feared fighters on the entire African continent. And in a few hours, they were going to walk straight into the guns of a European army. Their king didn't send them because he was desperate. He sent them because he had a plan. And here's what nobody ever tells you about that plan. It was already 3 years in the making before a single shot was fired. His name was Behanzin, king of the kingdom of Dahomey, commander of the most powerful army in West Africa, a man who looked the entire French Empire in the eye and said no. Not once, not twice, 3 times. He fought off the full force of French colonial military power 3 separate times. He went to Germany for weapons. He wrote letters to America asking for help. He burned his own palace rather than let France sit on his throne. He commanded an army of 6,000 women warriors, decades before most European countries even let women vote. He is one of the greatest resistors of European colonialism Africa has ever produced. And they made absolutely sure you never learned his name. Today, we change that. Before the battles, and trust me, the battles are going to shock you, you need to understand the world this story lives in. Because when most people hear West Africa in the 1800s, they picture something small, something struggling. That's the version colonialism sold us. The real version was completely different. The kingdom of Dahomey, sitting where the country of Benin is today, was a sophisticated, organized, militarized state. It had a professional army, a working treasury, a court system, political structures so well built that the French, after conquering it, quietly borrowed parts of them for their own colonial administration. Let that sink in. France conquered Dahomey and then used Dahomey's system to run the territory. They called it primitive on the way in. They copied it on the way through. But what made Dahomey unlike any kingdom on earth, what made every single visitor stop and stare, was the army. Specifically, the Mino. Now, most people know them as the Agoji, the Dahomey Amazons, but almost nobody tells you what the Dahomey people themselves called them. Mino. In the Fon language, the language of Dahomey, Mino means our mothers. 6,000 trained killers, and the entire kingdom called them our mothers. Because in Dahomey, the woman who gave life and the woman who protected life were understood to be the same person. France had no concept for this, no category for this, and that is exactly why France was not ready. To join the Mino, the training they went through is something you need to hear. One of the initiation exercises, climbing a wall made entirely of acacia thorn branches, bare hands, no protection. Not climb it without getting caught. Climb it while getting caught. Keep moving, don't stop. Because the point wasn't to avoid pain. The point was to teach your body that pain is not a reason to stop. France sent soldiers who were brave. Behanzin sent soldiers who had been trained to be something beyond brave. Now, Behanzin himself, born around 1844, his birth name was Kondo. He became Behanzin when he took the throne.
The name Behanzin translates to the egg the rocks cannot crack, the shark that troubles the sea. He didn't choose that name by accident. But to understand the shark, you need to understand the moment the ocean turned against him.
By 1890, France had been doing one thing across Africa, taking. Kingdom by kingdom, they were swallowing the continent whole. In 1884, European powers sat in Berlin and divided Africa between themselves, drew lines on a map, gave each other territories. Not a single African king was invited. Not a single African person was asked. They just decided. And Dahomey sat on something France desperately needed, its coastline, the trade routes that ran deep into West Africa. Without Dahomey, France's entire colonial plan for the region fell apart. So, France sent an offer, or rather a demand in a suit. Accept French protection, hand over your port, reduce your army. Behanzin read every word. A silence, then quietly, and said no. He'd watched what France did to every kingdom that accepted their protection. He knew what it really meant. He wasn't going to let it happen to his people. In 1890, France stopped waiting. They sent soldiers. A general named Alfred Dodds led the force toward the coast. Now, here is the part that nobody in this niche talks about. Alfred Dodds was not a white European general. Dodds was born in Senegal. His grandfather was West African. He had African blood in his veins. He chose him on purpose. They thought sending a man with African heritage would break Behanzin psychologically, that it would send a message, even your own kind is marching against you. That is how France operated. They didn't just bring guns, they weaponized identity. And there's more. The soldiers who marched alongside Dodds were not all European. Many were tirailleurs Senegalese, West African men recruited and trained by France, sent to conquer their own continent. Africans were used to fight Africans on behalf of the empire that had already swallowed their own kingdoms. Behanzin knew this. He wrote letters to other African rulers begging them, do not give France your sons. Some listened, most didn't. The Equanimo met Dodds's force at the Battle of Cotonou, 1890. They broke through the French line, hand to hand. The French lost far more men than their commanders expected. France pulled back and signed a peace treaty with Behanzin. An empire just signed a peace treaty with an African king. France, the most powerful colonial force on the continent, just signed a treaty with him. Behanzin knew it wasn't really peace, it was time, and he was going to use every single day of it.
Before I tell you what Behanzin did with those 2 years and what happened when France came back, I need you to understand something about this man that no other video has told you. He didn't just prepare militarily. He did something that would only make sense decades later. He went shopping in Germany. After France retreated in 1890, Behanzin had roughly 2 years, and he understood international politics better than most of his European contemporaries. France and Germany were rivals. Behanzin knew that. So he found German merchants on the coast and made a deal. Modern rifles, artillery. He sent his own officers to learn European combat tactics. He wasn't refusing to adapt. He was refusing to be outgunned. He also tried to get America involved. He sent diplomatic communications, made legal arguments about Dahomey's sovereignty, tried to build an international case against French expansion. America didn't respond in any meaningful way. But the attempt tells you everything about the kind of mind this man had. In 1892, an African king was running a 3-continent diplomatic campaign while simultaneously preparing for war. In 1892, France came back. This time, Dodds had 3,000 troops, rapid-fire rifles, naval artillery, a plan to march straight to Dahomey and bring the throne down. Behanzin had roughly 12,000 soldiers, including 6,000 Mino. France had bigger weapons and an empire behind them. Behanzin had the jungle, a plan, and soldiers trained to keep moving through pain. He chose guerrilla warfare. For 3 months, Dahomey's forces refused to fight France on France's terms. Night attacks, ambushes, disappearing into the forest before France could regroup. They burned their own villages so the French couldn't use them as supply bases. The Minnow, in particular, terrified French soldiers. There are French military letters from this campaign, real letters written home, soldiers describing women who charged artillery positions with machetes and sometimes overran them. But here is where I need to tell you something uncomfortable, something most channels won't say because it complicates the heroic story. Dahomey, the wealth, the money that funded the Minnow, that built Abomey, that made the kingdom powerful, some of it came from the slave trade. Dahomey sold enslaved people to European traders for over a century. And here's the part that should make your blood boil. France, one of the biggest customers of that same slave trade for 100 years, used Dahomey's involvement in it as their moral justification for invasion. They created the wound, then came to say they were healing it. By November 1892, French forces were closing in on Abomey, the capital. 200 years of Dahomey's history, its palaces, its throne room, its ancestral records. Behanzin gave one order: burn it. His own palace, his treasury, his home. He set it on fire himself, rather than let France walk in and sit on his chair. You can have the walls, you cannot have what they stood for. He moved north, kept fighting, kept writing letters to other African kingdoms, calling for unity against the Europeans. Historians now consider those letters some of the earliest Pan-African political documents ever written. In 1892, this man was calling for African unity in 1892, and they never taught you his name. But before I tell you what happened when Behanzin finally surrendered, I need you to do something. After this video, search for the photographs of Behanzin in exile. He was one of the first African kings ever to be photographed. The pictures still exist. And when you see his face, sitting tall, looking directly into the camera, you will understand everything I've told you without me needing to say another word.